He had hung it up. My co-founder had already bought his ticket back.
At this point, Peter had already gotten no's from 30 top VCs, but then he gets a phone call.
I'll try to get you a meeting with Steve Anderson at Baseline.
He gets the meeting with the VC and it just started. Watch what happens.
The computer, ready to do a demo, ready to do anything. He's like, no, I don't want to see any of that. Just tell me why you're starting a company.
The VC first wanted to know the why behind starting the company. So they have the discussion and then the VC ends with this.
He said, all right, well, I'm pretty excited about this, but I know myself and I get excited about these kinds of things. So in 3 days, if I wake up and I'm still excited, I'll call you and we'll talk next steps.
This is an incredible story of grit and persistence by Peter Thompson, the CEO of LucidLink. If you're a founder or future founder, you get to understand how they hit product market fit, how they sold their way out of nearly shutting down the company, and how they got one of the most important rounds done in their journey to raising over $70 million and now currently being at $50 million in ARR. Now let's take you back to when they started.
I didn't know what I was going to do next. And I found my way to a program at Stanford, Sloan Fellowship Program, which is on the GSB, adjacent to the MBA program, 1 year on-prem, full-time, that is more geared towards people making some kind of a career change. I did that because I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was getting on in years, I was 48 at the time and not sure what to do next. And I thought I needed some time to look around and assess. And I did know I wanted to get back to the early stage. I really like that sort of chaotic period where you're trying to figure out markets and do all this kind of stuff.
Can I pause you on 1 second? You said you were 48 and you were trying to decide what to go to do next. I love that. And I love the humility of like, I'm going to go to a school. Like You've already had a lot of success in your career and you're like humbling yourself in a way and also opening your network. But was there any, did you have any doubts or fears just even though you had a lot of success that if you feel comfortable sharing?
Oh, yeah. No. So in order to get into the program, I had to take a GMAT. And when I first, found some online software to help prep for it and decided, okay, well, I'm just going to take this practice test. Yeah, I had doubts. I said, what am I going to do here? It'd been such a long time since I'd been in that mode. I realized I was reading who's getting into these and how smart these young kids are that still have the mental acuity that probably I'm starting to dull for me. It was really daunting to say, okay, well, I'm going to try to go back to school. I'm going to be in these classes with younger people. I've got to figure out how to get through this GMAT process. And it was scary.
Is there any kind of piece of advice that you'd share with yourself back then?
It was just keep going, one foot in front of another. Just, I didn't really question it. I just said, okay, I've got to get there. Just keep swimming, Dory.
it's simple, but I think in those moments when you're starting something new, even though you weren't even starting a business at that point, it's just to keep going. And personally just struggled with almost like paralyzing fear at times. You make the decision and then you're like, there's so many things. What if?
If I had one superpower in business, the resilience, the ability to kind of bounce back. We have a really bad day or a real setback and sure, it's going to affect you, but how you come back and just say, okay, got it. How do we take it forward?
So you started in 2016.
Yeah. So 2016, a colleague at the other company reached out to me. He had this idea that was born from our own challenges at that company of collaborating with large sets of data and files. He'd been working on this idea and would I care to see a prototype? And when he showed it to me, I said, wow, this shouldn't even be possible. Is this actually happening in real time? And he said, yeah. So I said, all right, well, I've got like 6 months left in this program. Why don't we use the resources and the time and leverage all this and try to figure out if we're confident we've got a company to try to fund here to start. That's exactly what we did. And by January, this was actually in about October when we started talking.
Of 2016? Or is
of
that
2015. That's
of
of 2015. January of 2016 is when we actually incorporated. So by that time, we were convinced.
Built the software.
He'd built a throwaway prototype just to convince ourselves that it was feasible to build.
And that's from the, basically a lot of 2015. He's working on that. Y'all come together in late 2015 and then January of 2016, you're like, we're going to do this.
Yes.
How much customer validation were you doing in this time period, like Q4 of 2015 and Q1 of 2016?
Oh, as much as possible. And that's where being at Stanford really was useful. I had a stanford.edu email address. Anybody in the Valley was picking up a phone and talking to me as a student. And it was wonderful. One of the early meetings that just kind of turned on the lights for us was actually at Tesla. What he said is, the first thing we do when we come in and sit down is turn on these servers and try to load the models and then basically go out and get coffee for 15 minutes until it is ready for us to work on. Or having to work in serial instead of in parallel because somebody has to work on it, then somebody else, then somebody else. He said, if this really works the way you're saying, well, he did the math and said this many engineers at this much per hour, saving this much, that would probably save us $4 or $5 million a year. I'm like, okay, that sounds pretty validating.
We got something here.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you reach out to them? Like what was the channel? Was it a referral or did you directly just cold outreach?
No, actually, this one happened to be a friend. Our children were both in the same swimming class. And so every Saturday we were going to this pool and standing around watching the kids swim, and you just kind of chat. And I told him what we're doing, and he said what he's doing, and it was just that.
I love to hear that. I also hate to hear that because it's like I've been the person who's like wants like a system, a process. We can just follow these things, reach out to all these people, and then it spits out the right answer in product market fit. But there's so many moments like you're describing where it just kind of aligned. But you said you were still doing other outreach.
Yeah.
To people. And like, could you give us the number of people? Was it 100 during the time of Q4, Q1, or was it like 10?
It was closer to 100. Some of the experiential classes, I used this as subject matter and pulled together a team. And so then we were able to conduct more interviews. And we were trying to get to sort of that 100 magic number just so we knew it wasn't a one-off. And really what we wanted to know is this a technology, a product, or a company? Because those are three very different things. And if you're trying to start a company on just a feature or a technology, that's a tough thing to do.
Interesting. How do you break those down a little bit more? Because I think it seems when I talk to founders, the really thin MVP that is just super poignant, they respond to the email, they're willing to talk to you, and then they might say like, yeah, I'll try this out. But then you talk to the VC and it's like, that's not a big enough product. How did you delineate that? Because to me, this seems like it could be just a small product, like versus.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's if it's really, if you'll find the absolute clarity or conviction. You have to kind of believe yourself. So you do need to just have that belief. But you need to also try to validate that, and you need to be open to what if you're wrong and looking for basically trying to disprove the theory to yourself. I think that's what you have to do.
That is something that you don't want to do. Like, because
I know.
already, and the longer you go,
right,
you're like, we've already spent all this time. I've gone all in. He's been spending how many hours, and now we're trying to have that disprove. Is there any advice that you would have to yourself or anyone who's in that? Like,
you just got to be courageous enough to do it. I mean, you could be wrong. Well, chances are you'll be wrong. I mean, if you look at the stats, you're likely wrong. Or you're likely your timing is off, or you're likely that the market changes, or there's some extraneous event that occurs. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why it might not work out. But you just have to be intellectually honest with yourself about it.
That's so interesting. And how many interviews did you get to before you became convicted?
There were a couple of key things that happened. One is fortunate to meet, I had coffee with Mark Templeton, who was at the time, or just finalizing, he was the CEO at Citrix Systems. So a huge multi-billion-dollar tech company, and somebody who absolutely knew the technology and the industry and everything. And his reaction to it was just, he's like, that's what I wanted when we were looking to buy another company. And this is actually what I had in mind. And if you guys can really do this, that's big. So that was a huge thing. And in fact, that actually also kicked off just a a fantastic, almost 10-year relationship with Mark now that I've had, where he's become mentor, coach, friend, sits on our board, was an angel investor. So yeah, he's been fantastic throughout this whole journey.
That's so cool. And so these meetings, it sounds like the conviction is there, because when I was a founder doing a bunch of interviews, they always, people want to tell you that it went well. They want to make you feel like this is the best thing ever. What was the follow-up afterwards in this kind of period? What, like the Tesla person maybe as an example?
Well, I think a couple of things we wanted to really suss out during those interviews was, number one, how big of a point of pain were we addressing, right? And you know, if you're trying to sell a product that solves maybe a 5 or a 6 out of 10, that's going to be a tough road to sell. So you really need to understand, you know, just how big of a problem are you actually solving, and then the willingness to buy. And even though you don't have a product, you really have to still go through that process of trying to close the sale and really ask them, will you buy this? And
In meeting one.
Well, maybe not meeting one.
Yeah.
It depends. Maybe that also depends. You know, and you're not actually asking them to sign it, but you do need to ask them to be honest. You know, is this something that you would invest in? Is this something you'd buy? Or, you know, however you're going to do that. But try to close the sale. See what happens.
I love that. Like, because that is uncomfortable. It's more comfortable to stay in like, hey, just try it out. Like, it's okay. It's not fully ready yet anyways.
Yeah.
But you're saying like, we're driving for that sale as soon as possible.
Right. And ask for the negative feedback. Say, what's missing from this? What's wrong with it? I came out of the sales side of companies. I mean, I manage sales teams and everything. And so I'm really well aware of the salespeople, and myself included, tend to want to put on those rose-colored glasses and happy ears and hear the good stuff. But you really have to be skeptical.
It's just like the skeptic nature that you had, and it was almost like you treated it as just like, hey, this is a project that we're working on. Mm-hmm. If it works or not, it's okay.
Both my co-founder and I are data-driven people. And so that's part of it. You know, let's not just work on emotion or we got to really try to figure out what does the data say.
There was a moment that you mentioned around funding.
Yeah, our first funding, the company that almost never was.
It seems to me like you're about to get the biggest round from the best in VCs, like no questions, with the traction you're.
That's what I thought. I mean, one of the classes was putting together a so-called mock pitch deck, and the final was pitching it to a panel of VCs, and you know, just the reaction was like, oh, okay, well, we're going to get funded. You know, I really thought that, and to the point where spring semester I was already out and having pitch meetings, and then spring semester turned into summer, and then summer turned into fall, and the number of pitch meetings and the number of no's was north of 30 with every one of those. I mean, these are really smart people who've seen successful businesses. And, you know, when they tell you no, you're like, okay, what are they seeing that I'm not? How can I, you know, get that conviction again? How can I have that courage to keep moving on? How can I go into that next one with the same level of excitement? So it's a hard process. You're
saying from all this conviction, the Tesla and the Citrix CEO are saying this is great. I got to have it. You're already building it. You've already done probably 6 months or more of interviews, and the VCs are just not biting at all. And and what ended up, like, what happened before you closed the round? Like, did you say, was there a point where you were like, we're going to continue or we're going to shut it down?
Well, we had to. You know, neither one of us were bringing in an income. I was paying for school, and my co-founder was also not bringing in an income. So we said, okay, if by this date we're not funded, we got to hang it up.
What was the date range?
It was November 15th.
I love how you still remember it. November 15th of 2016.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just putting that on there so we can reference it. November 15th, 2016. And when did you set that date?
We set that date, I would say probably around August time frame. So we had a few, I mean, we had enough months and enough things on it. I didn't think we were going to get to that point, but we did.
So you were still feeling convicted that we're going to get this round.
I figured we just hadn't found the right one. They didn't know our business. They didn't know the market, whatever the reason was.
So what shifted from all these no's to actually getting the round done?
Well, so another contact of mine who I was talking to, and he was a fellow founder. He was in a very successful, high growth company that he'd founded, and had gone through the same process a few years before me, actually going through the same program and everything. And he said, "Okay, I'll try to get you a meeting with Steve Anderson at Baseline, and I'll let you know." So he comes back to me and he says, and so this is like maybe November 10th, right? I mean, basically I'm telling him, look, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. We're going to hang it up. So he says, "I'll try to get you this meeting."
Were you looking for other jobs?
I hadn't, not yet, but I was certainly wondering, what am I going to do next? How do I take this experience and parlay that into something?
But you were still like 95% like all in on just trying to make this work. But
yes.
But those doubts it wasn't even doubts. It sounded like just the reality of a new season, meaning you're not going to be doing this.
Yeah, and we were spending money. I mean, we had in order to fund the company, we'd written personal checks into it. It's actually we also had received a couple of angel investors' funds from classmates at Stanford who were watching this whole process, and they're like, "You guys are going to be successful. I'll put in money." And I told you this story about in Japan, and I realized last thing I want is to burn through the money that these guys give me in a few months and then say sorry. So what we agreed was that we were going to basically put it in escrow for the company and use our own money until we got funded. And if we got properly funded by an institutional investor, then we would bring their money in. Otherwise, I wanted to be able to return it.
I love that. That's such an honorable thing.
I don't know if it's honorable or not, but it's just the way we felt. I mean, I couldn't bear to go back to them and say, thanks for the money, burned it, didn't work.
That's so good. And just a quick time on, like you said, when we went on a walk before the podcast, and you were talking about just being raised in Minnesota and just like a Midwestern kind of mindset. And one of the takeaways you said was that like there are no shortcuts. And I feel like in this same light of the way that you're looking at money, I feel like we can, in this area around startups, it can feel like, oh, it's just like free money. It's just here, there, people throwing around millions, whatever. Yeah. But it's like you never lost the value of that dollar.
Yeah, it's somebody's money, right? It's always somebody's money. So yeah, I felt that they were entrusting it because they weren't investing in the company. They were investing in me. And by the way, that's what I realized, that early stage investors are investing in the founders and the team. Everybody's got a great idea. The question is, are you going to be able to bring in the people, to recruit the right people and execute on the plan and actually bring it to fruition? And so that's what they're betting on.
Yeah. So you're 5 days before.
So 5 days before, actually my co-founder had already bought his ticket back to, he's originally from Bulgaria, to take his family back and, spend some time with them, sort of like the last thing, and then bear down and find a job. And so I got the confirmed meeting with Steve. And I went, and it was down on Union Street in San Francisco, and we went into a coffee shop, and I pulled out my printed pitch deck in case I was like, got this in case I don't have a connection or whatever. Pull out the computer, ready to do a demo, ready to do anything. He's like, no, I don't want to see any of that. Just tell me why you're starting a company. And tell me about the idea. And I'm like, oh, well, let me show you. No, I don't want to see that. I want to hear you tell me why, you're doing this and what the idea is.
And what did you say?
Well, did the best I could, and I guess it was good enough because he at the end of it, we had a nice hour-long coffee, and he said, "All right, well, I'm pretty excited about this, but I know myself, and I get excited about these kinds of things. So in 3 days, if I wake up and I'm still excited, I'll call you and we'll talk next steps." I'm like, okay. And so I go back out to the car and I immediately called George. He said, "So you had another meeting?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "How'd it go?" I said, "I think it went well." He goes, "What do you mean you think?" I said, "Well, he said he liked it and wanted to talk next steps." He said, "So what are the next steps?" I said, "Well, we'll find out in 3 days." "What do you mean?" Like, well, okay. He thinks he likes it, but he wants to sleep on it, and then he'll let us know. He goes, "Is that like 72 hours, 3 days? Is this, I mean, what is it? Is it a metaphorical 3 days? What are we talking about?" And I'm like, "I don't know." So the third day I wake up and finally my phone rings about 8 a.m. and it's Steve. And he says, "Well, I'm still interested, but one thing, I got to meet your co-founder." I said, "Okay, sure, no problem. I'll set up a Zoom this afternoon." He said, "No, I think I really need to meet him in person." Like, okay, got it. I'll make it happen. So I called up George again and I said, "George, that ticket that you bought to bring your family back to Bulgaria that you're leaving tomorrow? You got to cancel that and come out here instead." And he's like, "Really?" So finally he ended up doing it. And
Was he skeptical about canceling? Because I mean,
oh yeah, I mean, again,
that's a huge...
we're burning our last funds, and it's not a cheap ticket to come out here, and yeah.
And how many VCs have already told you no?
33.
Not that you're counting. I love it.
Not that I'm counting. I have a list. I keep that list. I'll go back to them.
Just this could have been the return.
Yeah.
So what in that meeting? What was it like? What was the moment when did he tell you in that meeting that he was going to raise?
Well, I wasn't in the meeting.
Okay.
I was literally a half a block away at a different coffee shop. George is at the same coffee shop, and I said, "You got to try to close him. Bring me in as soon as you start talking about this." And so he calls me. He said, "Well, he just went to the bathroom, but you better come. He said he's going to give us some money." So yeah, that was it. After that, it was really talking about the terms and how much and what we were going to spend it on and what the next steps were and that kind of thing.
And that was it. And
that was it.
It
turned out to be as easy as that. But up until that point, it wasn't. You just had to find the right one.
Wow. Because you were going about it. So you're saying the inside is not so much like in this very first check, search. It's the inside is not so much about the way you pitch and bringing the right preparation. I'm sure you were getting better.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there is just like, it's got to be the right match. And sometimes volume is the only way to get to that.
I think that's the case. I mean, we were speaking with great VCs, with great records, with wonderful partners, super smart people. And yeah, sure, we kept iterating our pitch. We'd find out, try to figure out, their business is sourcing deals. So they don't want to really tell you no up front because just in case, kind of leave the door open. So it's really difficult to try to understand what they really think sometimes. Not all of them. Some of them I'll tell you. They'll tell you straight out. And I really appreciated that. Hard to hear, but you'd appreciate that more because then you'd learn what did they feel was missing or what did they think was the reason that the company would fail or, something. And so you could take and learn from that. I mean, it is hard. You constantly have to be figuring out how to get funded. And there's no way around it.
And did you have any customers at this time, by the way?
Oh, no, we didn't even have a product. I mean, we had a demo and we had a pitch, a pitch deck essentially. Because low resolution product.
And so it was really like, if you don't get funding, that's it. There is no other. You weren't trying to say, hey, how could we actually just build this? Because it was too overwhelming to build.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is very highly technical. Even when we did get funded, it took us almost 2 years to get to GA. It was a high technical lift that required solving a bunch of problems that, I mean, half the no's were either it's not going to be possible, it won't work. Even if you do build it, the economics won't pay off because of this or that, infrastructure costs or whatever it might be, or it's not a big enough problem, people aren't going to pay for it. And so those are the ones, that's where you need to have the courage and the conviction to say, no, you're wrong. We do know this. We've talked to enough people. We know we can sell it. And we've got the team that's going to be able to build it.
And these are the type of investments, like as a former SaaS founder, for me, it was always like, it's not, the challenge is not, can you build it as much? And I know there's a lot of SaaS subscription, but what we were building was not technologically super difficult. It was more about nailing product market fit and growing fast. But traditional VC model is what is like a deep tech. This is really hard to build. We need the money to do it. So I would have thought that it would have been a lot faster. Yeah. And your background, your founder's background, your co-founder's background, and just having that Stanford.edu, I'm sure like you would think it would have been faster, honestly. Yeah. And the validation that you're getting, and yet it wasn't. And so that should just be an insight of like, the no's are it's just part of it.
Yeah, it's just part of it. And actually, I've talked to some founders going, 33, we are over 100. I've heard that before. So, and I know how hard 33 was. So, can't imagine having to go through 100 of them.
That's really cool. Well, so let's fast forward to the moment when you tell me when you realized you hit product market fit.
Yeah. So during this period, 2 years to build it, and again, going through and selling vision and future, right? It was hard, but we were saying, okay, we know the pattern of the customer we have. It was what inspired us, a distributed team of people collaborating on a bunch of files. And then when the files got big, that became even harder. But we found that everywhere I looked. I mean, I found it in, like Tesla, in engineering design, in architecture, in video collaboration, in any kind of rich content creation, in medical imaging, in life science research. I mean, it just was everywhere. You started to look for that pattern, you'd start seeing that pattern. And we began getting some early sort of beta-ish customers who were in each one of those categories, basically. So then at 20...
So you got funding in the end of Q4 2016.
Yeah.
And I'm just writing 2018. You had to build for...
Yeah.
To 2019. Are we 2019?
We're at 2019. We were probably mid 2019 when we came out with our GA. Maybe actually early April of 2019, I believe it was, when we came out with the actual product, and we were now starting to put on customers. We were at the point where we had to go out and raise another round. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're targeting our Series A at this point. And we didn't have the Series A metrics to raise a really good round. We knew that you wanted to have $1 million ARR by that time. We had like 100K in ARR. We had probably 30 customers, and every one of them said, this is amazing, this is different, this just works, this is great. But we didn't really have the metrics. So in fact, one of the early VCs we talked to said, well, I see a lot of smoke, but no fire yet, right? But we were raising the round because of runway. You raise for 18 to 24 months, and it's going to take a while to raise again. So when you start looking at that runway shortening, well, you better be out there raising your next round. And we were doing that in 2020, early 2020. And we were actually driving up Sand Hill Road to one of our meetings, and I got a call, and they said, so we're not allowed to have any more face-to-face meetings, this little thing called COVID or something. So we're gonna put a pause on all new investments till we just let this thing get sorted out. So a couple of weeks, we'll probably be back at it. And we're like, oh, well, that sucked. Okay, well, we'll have some coffee and wait for our afternoon meeting. Same one. And basically, our entire week got wiped out, and we didn't know what we were going to do.
And what was your runway at that point?
Oh, we probably had 6 months or less. Actually, less. We had less, probably 4 months or something like that.
That's not a lot.
Not a lot. Absolutely not a lot.
And you had no clear line of sight on who's going to write the next check.
Nope. Nope.
And now you're getting canceled.
Now we're getting canceled. Yeah.
Was there a, hey, we'll talk on Zoom, or was there, hey, like, we don't know what?
We're putting a pause on all new investments. Capital markets just dried up overnight at that time.
How many customers did you have at that time?
I think we less than 50. We probably had around 50-ish and about a little around 100K in ARR.
Okay.
So we got lots of advice. We thought about doing riffs and layoffs and trying to just live to fight another day. In fact, that was the prevailing advice. Get out of any kind of ongoing contracts, renegotiate any kind of things. Try to see if you can get any debt, get a government loan, lay off a third or a half of your force. And we sat down and said, layoffs just doesn't seem like, when we said, well, here's how we're going to start a company and this is the culture and this is, the values and everything else, this doesn't align to that. So instead we said, we'll be transparent with everyone. We'll explain exactly what the problem is, which did align with our culture and our core values. And ask everybody to take a deep pay cut and that we're going to try to see if we can make this work out.
Ask everyone on your team to take a pay cut?
The entire company.
Versus layoffs?
Versus layoffs.
What was the advice that your board, was there anyone on your board who disagreed with that? I'm curious, what they would have said against that.
Well, when we showed them what we could do and the amount of runway we could get out of it, they weren't going to say no. And I think many on the board applauded the spirit behind doing that.
Creativity.
But we had a plan. It wasn't that we didn't have a plan. We said, okay, by doing this, here's how we'll extend our runway. Here's what we're going to do. Here's all of these other pieces that we put together.
What was that meeting like? Can you maybe when you first told the company that?
Yeah. Yeah. On an all hands Zoom call. All hands Zoom. I mean, we were a distributed team. We had half our people in Bulgaria, half spread out everywhere else. A lot of fear, and them needing to see that we believed we were going to make it work. Trust in that. I think we lost one person. That's it. They just said they ended up decided it just wasn't, whatever, their circumstances didn't allow for that to work for them.
What I'm curious what you said, if you summarize it in a sentence or two.
We're almost out of money and we can't get funded. And here's our plan to try to get past this rough spot. And we laid out all the steps we'd be taking. And essentially said, we're going to try to sell our way out of it. And one of those things was we absolutely had to just pick our initial go-to-market, our initial go-to-market vertical and be successful there.
And be successful. You had to pick the right one.
Yeah.
And you had to be successful there.
Yeah.
And you go from previously saying all these different industries are going to want us and I've talked to enough people. So
we didn't know that each one of those showed interest and there were, pros and cons to everything. But this was another one where the data wasn't going to tell us what to choose. It was a moment where we really had to just say, okay, we got to choose one. So let's make the best choice we can possibly make and just go for it and have the conviction and the courage and everything else to go after it.
Could you take us into the meeting that I'm assuming you made the decision with your co-founder ultimately?
Yep.
Can you take us into a decision point where y'all are maybe between a couple options or?
Well, the one we did feel pretty strongly around the creative content for video because we had a couple of early customers who were just like, this is voodoo. This is black magic. This is crazy. It just works. It shouldn't work, but it just does. And it allows us to do these things we thought were impossible. It allowed us to change the way we work. And that yielded such great ROI in terms of productivity and savings. And so we knew that there was a huge case to be made there. And then so COVID almost killed us. And in fact, we were managing our cash week to week. We paid the last payroll we could possibly pay with the money we had in the bank twice, and then just kind of barely sold our way out of it. And then during that time, suddenly we got a big broadcaster, A&E Networks in New York, called us up, said, so our contacts over at Adobe, we called them and said, I just sent home 80 editors from my studio. What do I do? And they said, well, we don't have a solution here internally, but we hear this thing works. In fact, we've looked at it and it works pretty good. It looks like you just install it and go. So they told them to call us, and we said, yeah, we can do that. And we put them on a POC, and within 6 weeks, that turned into about $100K in ARR. So we almost doubled our sales right there in that first one. And then hot on the heels of that, actually during that 6-week sort of transition, we got our second call from Vice News, and then our third call from Viacom CBS. And that's when we said, all right, we are no longer, for now, we are no longer a file service, cloud file service. We are now a video collaboration platform. And we just doubled down on that. We started focusing all of our marketing on that. We hired industry professionals who knew the workflows and the other tools and could speak the language. And so during that 2020 is when we went from 100K to $1 million. And then we went from $1 million to 5, and then 5 to 15. And now here we are coming up on 50. Go figure.
That is, I really appreciate your humility in this, by the way, just because it seems like in that 2020 piece, it could have easily gone in another direction. But it's almost like you took a step of faith before the call came from these big broadcasting customers.
Yeah. And I think that was probably one of the things we should have done sooner in retrospect. We should have just said, okay, we don't have all the data. We have to just make a decision somewhat on intuition and gut. And so luckily we still had enough time when we did make the decision. But we maybe should have done it sooner.
Yeah, and that was, so it sounds like that meeting that you had with the team where you asked everyone to decrease their salaries. How long after that did you make the decision for the beachhead focus?
We had been talking about it even before that meeting, and but around that time, I think it became absolutely glaringly obvious when we got that first phone call, and we just said no looking back.
So that was still after.
That was still after, yeah.
So you still said this is the industry we're going to go for. How did you frame the industry even in that? Was it broadcasting or was it?
No. So, well, originally we said media and entertainment.
Okay.
And then we realized as we started to grow through that $1 million in ARR into the 5, we realized that a lot of the deals we were getting were marketing departments from enterprise customers who used rich content to tell part of their story. So, I mean, the big one that struck home for me was Whirlpool. My team said, well, we just closed Whirlpool. I'm like, Whirlpool? What did they buy us for? Like, oh, they've got 300 creatives in their marketing department. I'm like, oh, okay, makes sense. So, yeah, we had that. We also had a lot of, with some organic traction from game manufacturers, Epic Games, Tencent, all these guys that instead of using the Adobe stack might be using Unreal engines and other, parts of it. But otherwise the same class of problem, just a different set of tools and a different workflow. And then the AEC was the same way, architecture, engineering, and construction, using Autodesk, Revit, CAD/CAM, all that kind of thing.
That's so good. Just with our last question, like, what would you say is like the biggest piece of advice that you would give to yourself around, or anyone who's in that season of pre-product market fit? They have to make the decision. They have something. Have they gotten a couple customers, but it just hasn't hit yet?
Look, you're just going to have to dig deep and find courage and grit. You've just got to keep swimming. You got to keep putting that one foot in front of the next. Go until you can't go.
Yeah.
That's it.
It sounds like even in the way that you set these dates, I think that's a really courageous thing back in the seed round where you said November 15th. Like it's almost like a surrender.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know if I like surrender, but it is being honest. You have to face the reality that the majority of companies don't get funded. The majority of companies fail, and it's okay. It's all right. It's not against. It's not because, I don't know. It doesn't reflect who you are as a person or as a founder or as anything. Just is.
Because you're saying, and you said this on the walk, like it could have easily happened.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know what would have happened if they didn't suddenly have work from home mandates everywhere. I don't know. We'd be a different looking company. I don't know if we'd still be around, or I think we'd still be around, but I don't know what we'd be. Yeah, it might be different.
And maybe even the seed round that you got, maybe if that meeting hadn't happened in that timing, that would have been a different story.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is timing. There is a lot based on luck, but I guess it's also making yourself prepared and in a position where you're able to act on fortune, right? It's not dumb luck. It's being able to take advantage of timing and fortune.
It's like, what's the next right decision to make? And it's usually going to be hard. Like I'm just thinking about the March of 2020 where it's like, we could try to just not, it's going to be easier to not go tell the company that we're going to go decrease their salaries.
Yeah.
Or maybe it'll be easier to just lay them off. But you're like, I'm going to take this hard decision. And you did it. And then you got rewarded after that with the time to be able to receive these deals that came in.
If you sat down, we did sit down early in our stage and we said, here's our core values. We set that out. Here's what we think defines that and everything. I think that's important because it helps guide you what is your rudder through those times, because it's during the easy times, core values are easy to maintain or to adhere to. It's only when it's the tough times, and if you actually use your values to make the toughest decisions, then they're truly your values. Otherwise, they're just a poster on the wall.
Words on a wall.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
This is amazing. You made it to the end. My name's Adam O'Donnell, and I'm on a mission to help founders hit product market fit, get funded faster, and stay up to date with all the great things that are happening in Silicon Valley and startups. If you want to learn more, go to thefounderinitiative.com or go on YouTube, The Founder Initiative, and you'll be able to see a lot more content like this. Have a great day. Boom.